This is Where We Live from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Catherine Shen. The song you're hearing is Watam Ishkatu If Taharim from the album Unsilenced that was published in 2023 by Cuatro Puntos. It's a song about loving your homeland. Cuatro Puntos is a Connecticut nonprofit working to amplify persecuted and underrepresented music and musicians around the world. In 2021, the Taliban returned to power in Afghanistan and began cracking down on music. Instruments were destroyed and musicians were silenced. This song was recorded by musicians in Afghanistan, including a female and male vocalist, recording in secret. Today, we hear from Afghan musicians taking part of an upcoming performance called Symphony of Resilience, the Afghan Orchestra Unsilenced at the Bushnell in Hartford. And joining us now is Nazira Wali. She's a musician and one of the only known Afghan women composers in history. Nazira, thank you so much for being on the show with us today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure.
It's a pleasure for us as well. And with us too is Arsen Farhim. He's a pianist, composer, and conductor, and he'll also be performing this Sunday at the Bushnell. Arsen, thank you for joining us today as well.
Thank you, Catherine. It's great to be here.
And also with us is Kevin Bishop, who's the founder and executive director of Cuatro Puntos. Thanks, Kevin, for joining us today.
Thank you.
And for our listeners, you can also join the conversation. Give us a call, 888-720-9677, or find us on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. So Arsen, I want to start the conversation with you today and talk about how did you first get introduced to music? I know in previous conversations you've talked about seeing the movie The Pianist, which is based on a true story about a man's survival during World War II, and that really inspired you. Can you describe that experience for our listeners?
Yeah, I mean, I was a pretty young kid living in Pakistan at the time as a refugee, like a lot of Afghans did during the uh, late 90s, early 2000s. And this movie happened to be playing on the TV, and for the first time ever, I was kind of introduced to the piano. I saw it through this movie, and I wouldn't even say I was interested or inspired. I just became very curious about it. Like, what is this? And how does like some sound save a person's life? How is that so powerful? And that curiosity just stayed with me for many, many years until I finally did have a chance to take a lesson and kind of see a piano for the first time with my own eyes. And that's when my first lesson, I just realized, oh, wow, that power is real. It does do something magical. I immediately fell in love, and I've been playing the piano and making music ever since.
And what was it about the piano that you became attached to? Of course, you saw the movie, but like you said, it wasn't necessarily what was the inspiration, but what was it like, seeing that piano for the first time and touching the keys for the first time?
So many things, and especially like over time, as I've grown as a person, as an artist, it's kind of changed. I mean, I think parts of it as a kid maybe was just wanting to like show off and, play music
Right.
for others and pretend like I'm a world-class concert pianist. Parts of it was like I had just moved to Afghanistan from Pakistan after being a refugee for my whole life before that, and didn't have a large community of friends or, a support system. And the piano became that for me. I would practice like 8 hours a day and then like take a lesson. And then like, I remember even like my lunch, I took my lunch and then I would eat it sitting under the piano. That's like how comfortable I felt like being with the piano, like how safe I felt. But I think more than anything now, and like this has been developing over the last like, decade or so, is it's how I see myself, being a citizen of the world who plays a role in shaping the world and its future. It's how I want to be a part of the fabric of society, how I see myself making a difference.
Well, and I think there's something very universal about the desire of wanting to look very cool, right? When you're performing. I don't think you're definitely not alone with that. And it sounds like you really found community and solace in music, and it was something that was really there for you when you needed it the most.
It absolutely has been, and it continues to do that for me to this day. There are times where, being a musician is really, really hard. Being a musician anywhere is hard. Being an Afghan musician is
Right.
especially hard. And that stress sometimes like does just add up. You're thinking about how are you going to make this work? How are you going to make a living doing this? Um, but then like there are these moments where just you listen to your favorite piece of music or you play it and it kind of just simplifies life. Like for a moment of all those complexities, all those stresses just fade away and you're kind of transported to I don't know where, and you're just enjoying that piece of music in a way that like nothing else just touches you like that. And in those moments, it reminds me why I fell in love with music and why, I've basically dedicated my whole life to it. Not just dedicated my whole life to it, it's become my whole life.
Well, we appreciate you sharing your whole life with us today, and you've been in so many different places at such a young age too, from different countries and just different spots, finding different communities. Can you talk about how were musicians and music viewed at this time? Because I think oftentimes musicians were and currently still are viewed both as people who can entertain, but people who are also advocates or activists.
Yeah, I think that's definitely true. And there's a saying that art does not exist in a vacuum. And same for music. It kind of is a conversation about the things happening in the world and what to do about it, and like beyond the entertainment, but music really does make a change in the world. And the way I think it does that most is by touching other people. There's a saying that I love, which is music might not change the world, but music can change people, and people change the world. And I think the way it does that, and the way like it gives me a power to share what I think, what I feel, and the things I see wrong with the world. That's how music does become this amazing tool for activism and for protest. And I mean, all of those are great, but to go a step beyond that, being an Afghan musician, being a musician from a place where music right now is pretty much banned, where, music is a crime, people are being killed for playing music. Just each note of music I play, I feel like I'm making a statement. It's a statement of defiance, and it's like just a symbol for not giving up, for persistence, for making music no matter what. And music is just the beginning. I mean, if they can take away such a fundamental right, the right of playing and listening to music, of self-expression, every other right will also be a question, which, they've been cracking down on. Music is just one of the many things that the Taliban regime is so inhumanely taking from Afghans.
And Nazira, I would love to also ask you, how did you first get introduced to music?
Mm, Growing up, I honestly didn't know anything about classical music or the world of instrumental music, and I first was introduced to music when I joined the Afghanistan National Institute of Music, which is the only music school in Afghanistan, and that's how I learned about music and started music.
And when you discovered classical music, was there a particular piece of instrument that you really gravitated towards?
It was pretty good, quick for me to decide. I only had like the first hours of seeing the instrument because the school needed we needed a lot of students to join because the school just had started was only started the school in 2010, and I joined the school in 2011. So I hadn't had any introduction to any particular piece or anything. I just had heard the cello sound by passing by through one of practice rooms in the school, and I just fell in love with the warm sound of when I heard, and that's how I chose.
That's amazing. What was it about the cello? Was it a particular piece of music, or like you mentioned, it was just the way it sounded, and you wanted to create that music?
Yeah, exactly. I just the sound I heard, it was so beautiful, I thought, and I just wanted to learn that and be able to play like that beautiful sound I heard. Yeah.
And what was it like being able to do that for the first time?
I mean, I started playing really horribly. But now I finally feel like confident and creating sound and making music, and I love it and I enjoy it so much.
And Arsen, you also attended the Afghanistan National Institute of Music. Can you talk about what did your early education and musical instruction look like? Who were your first teachers and educators there?
Nazira, do you want to go ahead and talk about that first?
Or Nazira, you can do that first.
Oh, what was the question? Sorry.
What can you talk about? What's your early education and musical instruction look like? Did you have teachers and educators that really made an impression on you?
Yeah, definitely. My first teacher, Robin, she was the person who was playing the cello, and I fell in love with it. And I learned the cello from her, but unfortunately, she left the country after a year. And my musical journey has been really tough, but I'm so committed and so willing to learn it. So I kept playing, even though I didn't have teacher for years. And I was just taking lessons from violin teachers. And then I was having teachers who were coming to Afghanistan during the winter academy for like 2-3 months. And then the whole year I was without a cello instructor. But it was because of the situation in Afghanistan. It was really tough to find teachers to come and teach us there. And as you know, we don't have any Afghan cellos who I could learn there. So it has been very rocky, but I'm grateful for where I am now.
And Arsen, you've been nodding your head as well. What was your sort of first look at early education like with your teachers?
So fun fact, my first ever piano teacher was Milad Yusufi, whose music we're actually going to be playing at the concert on Sunday as well, and I'll be playing the harmonium on his piece, which I'm very excited about. But I studied with Milad, who was a senior at the Afghanistan National Institute of Music at the time for a couple of months, and of course, within a couple of months, I knew I wanted to do this for the rest of my life. So I auditioned for the Music Institute. I got in, and I ended up studying there for about 10 years with lots of different teachers. Like Nazira mentioned, just because of the situation there, kind of finding faculty is very tricky. Afghanistan doesn't have a long history of Western classical music education and training, so finding Afghan teachers is always definitely hard. But even like just finding international teachers from different parts of the world to come and teach was really hard because they basically be risking their life to come teach there. So oftentimes what would happen is someone would come for a year, teach, and then leave, and then you'd have another teacher, which it also has its benefits. You get
Sure.
to work with different teachers and learn from different perspectives, and that's great too.
Well, and shortly after you graduated, you moved to the United States to pursue your higher education at the Longy School of Music of Bard College in Cambridge. And 2 weeks after you arrived, the Taliban took over Afghanistan. What was going through your mind as you were about to, embark on this new musical education journey and watching what was happening to your home country?
It was, I mean, it's the hardest time in my life. Um, there was this very like complicated mix of emotions. On the one hand, like this excitement for this new journey, excitement for meeting new people, for doing things that I had always dreamed of doing, but never had the opportunity to do. Things like playing on the concert grand piano on the Steinway. Like I was so excited to finally get to do that. Things like going to a beach for the first time in my life. Like even like all of these small things I was so excited about. Like to not even mention just the bigger picture of learning so much more, so many new things. But also, of course, on the same hand, seeing my country collapse into chaos and just the fear and worry for my friends, for my family, for my fellow musicians, knowing, how the Taliban uh, are cracking down on music. And I think more than anything, there was this feeling of guilt for me of like, why am I here? Why am I safe? Why do I have the freedom to make music while my loved ones don't? It did not feel fair. And what made that even harder is that like I go sit on the train, head to school, and like my life was like in turmoil and everything here felt like it was just going on normally. Like people, for a few days, it was on the news and you'd hear it on the radio, and then after a few days, even that, like, it wasn't happening as much. And it felt like a very lonely time. I mean, I didn't even have a lot of friends or an Afghan community or anything. Um, but those are the times when music comes through the most. I turn to music. I kind of turn to the piano to express how I felt. And yeah, I think I've been doing that ever since trying to uh, kind of go through this with music and try to make it easier. But the feelings continue to this day. The feelings of, feeling far away from home at times, feeling survivor's guilt, feeling angry, but also feeling excited for the fortunes that I have that uh, most Afghans do not, unfortunately.
Well, and you describe that it's the little things, right? Like going to the beach, but those really are big things in many ways. And I think oftentimes we here in the US take for granted that that is not accessible for a lot of people. So I really appreciate you sharing that with us. It's a reminder of how big and little these little trips, or even the fact that we have the freedom to listen to music, is something to really think about. And earlier you talked about you had this realization about how powerful music can be. Does it continue to do that for you personally, and the fact that you can perform it and share your story, not just through this conversation, but through your music? Is that powerful for you still?
Oh, yes. I think right now, probably more than ever, uh, like I mentioned earlier, given the situation that in Afghanistan, like Taliban are literally killing musicians and burning instruments. Um, it just makes it so much more powerful to say, no, we're not going to stop. We're going to keep making music and to do it more passionately than ever. Like this concert this weekend, it's something like historic, very, it has there have been very few concerts like these ever of Afghan music, where so many Afghan musicians come together with, other musicians from other parts of the world and play Afghan music together. So at a time when music is being silenced in Afghanistan, we're kind of trying to keep it alive outside our home until we can bring it home. So it's not just something I enjoy doing anymore. It's not just something that is a career for me anymore. It's not even just a passion anymore. It's a responsibility. I have to do it to keep it alive. It feels like I'm um, it's my cultural heritage, not just so it feels like a huge responsibility. And just to add one last thing to that, you mentioned like these small things that we take for granted, and you mentioned music. I really do think music should be taken for granted. I mean, it's such an essential part of life. It's so beautiful, it's so moving, it's so meaningful, it's so intertwined with everything that we do. There's music in everything from, of course, musical instruments, but also nature and beyond that. And it's just so human. And I think that's the way it's supposed to be. It's supposed to be taken for granted because we can't live without it. There's never been, a group of people that don't have music. Um, And that's what my goal is, like keep making music until Afghans can take it for granted too, and to be able to listen to as much music as their heart's content.
And Nazira, can you respond to what we've heard from Arson so far? Because you've had a very similar experience as well, right?
Yeah, I totally agree with what he says. Like music is not anymore about in like the enjoyment we get from or the love we have for it. It's for us Afghan and this opportunity that we have been given that we are safe and we can make music, we can create music. It's a responsibility for us to keep our music alive and keep playing it. And don't let Afghan and music die as the Taliban, as the way the Taliban wish to completely remove Afghan music and the culture. So, yeah.
And Kevin, I want to bring you in real quick before we go to break. Kevin Bishop is with Cuatro Puntos, bringing these musicians together. When you're hearing about both Nazira and Arson's stories, are you surprised? Because I think it's really hard for us to really wrap our heads around a world without music.
Yeah, the story of music in Afghanistan is always it's one of those things that I feel like, people in other places in the world may know the fact. Many people don't even know the fact that like music is banned in Afghanistan. But even if you do know that it's like a little tidbit of like, oh, music it's banned, it doesn't, it's hard to comprehend. It's so far away from normal comprehension that it's hard to believe. And I mean, that is how I ended up, going to Afghanistan and wanting to teach and be a part of the Afghan National Institute of Music in the first place, and how I ended up meeting wonderful people like Arson and Nazira and the others who were on our program. It's like for me, it was like, how is this possible? How is this, what leads a group of humans to, think that music should be banned? And of course, as Arson said earlier, it's just, music is just one of so many things. I mean, music is far down on the list actually of like all the rights taken away first, and just, I read that just in the last few weeks, the Taliban regime cracking down on all images of living beings, and even searching smartphones for images of your family, also all of the continued more and more cracking down on the rights of women, of course. I mean, the right to even be a woman is being taken away. And this, I read this week now, there's a new decree saying that women aren't allowed to speak outside of their homes. I mean, how can that be such a thing? So, music is just like taking one sliver out of this greater picture. And, with Cuatro Puntos and our goal and our mission, in amplifying silenced and persecuted musicians is, just doing what we can to provide any kind of support, framework, structure to, make it possible for people like Arsan and Nazira and our other composers, Kudrat Wasafi, Milad Yusufi, Muhammad Kambar, Nashad, who are other composers on the program, for all of their music to be heard, as well as the Afghan performers who are coming to play. So, I mean, I feel like it's our responsibility to do what we can, here in this country, to just provide the support, the structure that we can to make these to amplify this music.
And a quick note here, in 2023, the United Nations reported that the prohibition of music has been manifested through various measures. Persons accused of possessing instruments have been arrested, and musical instruments have been burned. Our guests today are musicians Nazira Wali and Arsan Fahim. They are part of an ensemble of Afghan musicians performing at the Bushnell this weekend. Also, Kevin Bishop, who's the founder and executive director of Cuatro Puntos. They'll all stay with us after the break. You'll find more information about the concert and the music played throughout this hour by visiting ctpublic.org/where we live. Join the conversation, 888-720-9677, or find us on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. This is Where We Live from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Catherine Shin. Coming up this weekend, 10 Afghan musicians will gather at the Bushnell Theater in Hartford to perform a special concert called Symphony of Resilience, the Afghan Orchestra Unsilenced. Today, we're talking to two of those musicians and composers, Nazira Wali and Arsan Fahim. They'll both be performing original pieces at the concert on Sunday. And also with us is Kevin Bishop, who is the founder and executive director of Cuatro Puntos. And you can find more information about the concert by checking out our website, ctpublic.org/where we live. So Arsan, we mentioned some composing just now. We're not talking about just playing music, but actually writing the music that you're going to be playing. Can you talk about some of your compositions? Because you wrote this incredibly moving piece called Farkunda. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah. So Farhanda was a woman who was very, very brutally murdered by an angry mob in Kabul back in 2014, 15, I think. 14 or 15, I don't remember exactly. But she was falsely accused of burning the Quran, and just this angry mob gathered. This is like right next to the presidential palace, like within walking distance from it. Like a place with a lot of security, and they started beating her. They beated her. They drove a car over her. They threw her off a building. They eventually set her on fire. All of this while while dozens of people were filming, and the police were just watching all of this unfold. And it went viral on social media. I remember when I heard that something like this had happened a few hours before it, I didn't believe it until I went home and saw the videos and saw the photos, and I was just so angry, so shocked, and just complete disbelief that humans could be this inhuman. And it took me a while to kind of, I wouldn't even say process it, but to just get out of that state of shock. And once I did, I was like, what can I do? Of course, I went to all the protests that took place for her. But eventually I decided, okay, I'm a musician. I want to write a piece in her memory. And, this was a few months after the incident had taken place. And by then, similar things had happened in different parts of the country that weren't as spoken about, but made me even angrier to see like no justice was served for Farhanda, and it was happening to more people, and nobody was doing anything about it. So I turned to the piano. I wrote this piece, and we were able to actually perform it at the spot where she was burned on the anniversary of her death. Um, but the reason this piece is really like special for me, I think probably my favorite piece that I've written, is because it really helped me like connect the dots between being a musician and being a person who can use their artistry to engage with the world, to use it as a tool for raising awareness and for social justice, for, you know, for protest, for um, raising my voice for all the things I believe in.
When in following your theme of raising awareness, you'll also be playing another original work called Broken Mountains on Sunday. Can you tell us about that composition and what is it about?
Yeah, Broken Mountains was the first piece that I wrote when I moved to the US in 2021. Um, as you mentioned earlier, just this was like less than 2 weeks before the collapse of Afghanistan. It was, a time of like a very, very tense time, but uh, like we didn't know what was going to happen and what the outcome would be. Like I certainly did not expect the country to be collapsing like within days of me leaving. Um, and when like I read about it and I heard that the Taliban are on the outskirts of Kabul and eventually took over. There were just so many lessons that I needed to turn to it, and I needed to play some music to kind of process that and to find some solace. But I remember thinking like, one of my favorite things about Kabul are the mountains surrounding it. You can always see these big, beautiful, majestic mountains everywhere. And I felt like even for something as grand as these mountains, for just so much endless war and violence and tragedy, like they must be feeling broken inside. Like at what point does something as strong and powerful as a mountain just feel broken inside? And I kind of turned to the piano and wrote this piece, and I was also able to perform it with a bunch of volunteer musicians from the Longy School of Music at a concert I organized titled Concert in Solidarity with Afghan Musicians, where we played this and a bunch of other arrangements of Afghan songs and things like that, in effort to kind of raise awareness about what musicians of the country were facing.
That was Broken Mountains, and it is just one of the pieces you'll hear at the concert Symphony of Resilience, the Afghan Orchestra Unsilenced, happening at the Bushnell this Sunday. And Nazira, you're also a composer, and you're actually one of only two Afghan women that we know of to write for an orchestra. What goes through your mind when you're sort of reminded of that?
So, yeah, this composition I wrote was also during the fall of Afghanistan to the Taliban. It was one of the most difficult time of my life, and I was just a freshman in college, and I just came here, and I didn't know anyone. I hadn't made any friends yet, and I was going through all of this pain that seeing my family back home seeing them in pain, and my younger sister who have been their most basic rights have been taken away from them, of like which is going to school. They are still banned. They can't go to school anymore. So I wrote this music just because I think it became an outlet for me to share, to express the pain and frustration I was feeling during that time. And it's just a representation of the country and my feelings of during that time. And even before the Taliban talk, I was thinking of even changing my major. I was taking science classes, and then Taliban took over and they banned music, and it just made me even more determined and to keep playing and continue making music, and don't let our music die. It has its reflection and of what has been happening back home and my feelings.
And Nazira, when you were composing this piece of music, did you ever think you were going to go beyond just playing an instrument? You're going to be writing music?
No, as I said, I was even thinking of changing my major,
right,
and letting alone writing music. And when the thing happened and all this frustration and this feeling I had inside and no one around me to share it, so that was the only thing I had to express and to take out all those frustration I was feeling inside and put it down through the only way I can. I was able to, and that was I think that was my way of kind of protesting against the Taliban and standing up for the musical right and saying that we will never give up and to whatever the Taliban want us to. And it was just, for me, it's an act of saying, you can decide to do whatever you want. You can burn the music. You can even harm musicians. It's really sad, but I'm not going to give up, and we will still keep on making the music.
And Arsen, you and Nazira have a lot of things paralleling, and there are a lot of themes that are echoing, I think, with both of your experiences. What has it been like being able to meet Nazira and connecting with other Afghan artists and musicians who have gone through similar experiences?
Well, I've known Nazira for most of my life now. We met back when we were kids and we're just starting our musical journeys. And I've made some amazing friends here in the US over the last 3 years who I love, but the people you've grown up with, it's a completely different feeling, especially just, people who like you have had to face so many challenges to get to do the thing that they love. So kind of reuniting and getting to meet those people again and hang out with them and share kind of memories of what it was like. So, the challenges of how we feel right now and also hope for the future. It just kind of puts everything into perspective, and just is a reminder that I'm not alone. It's a reminder that Nazira is not alone. It's a reminder that Afghan musicians anywhere are not alone, that we're all in this together. And for those of us that are fortunate enough to have the freedom of making music, we're trying to do everything we can to stand for those of us who don't have that freedom.
Well, we're very glad that both of you are here with us to share your love and for music and your culture with us. A reminder for our listeners that on Sunday, both musicians will be at the Bushnell in Hartford. The concert is Symphony of Resilience, the Afghan Orchestra Unsilenced. There will be performances at 3 p.m. and 6:30 p.m. You can find more information about it by visiting ctpublic.org/where we live. Give us a call if you have any questions, 888-720-9677, or leave us a comment on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. This is Where We Live from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Catherine Shen. This Sunday, Afghan musicians will gather to perform a special concert called Symphony of Resilience, the Afghan Orchestra Unsilenced, at the Bushnell in Hartford. And they'll be playing a mix of Western and traditional Afghan instruments. And with us still are some of the musicians that are part of this ensemble. Nazira Wali and Arsen Fahim are joining us this hour, along with Kevin Bishop, who is the founder of Cuatro Puntos Chamber Orchestra. So, Kevin, can you tell us more about the concert on Sunday and what has it been like bringing all the musicians together and putting together this performance?
Personally, it's been absolutely life-giving to bring this together. I mean, I got to be a part of working with Arsen and Nazira, when I was directing orchestras at the Afghan National Institute of Music in Kabul. And, I was part of the tour with, Nazira, the all-women's orchestra of Zora, when we went on to the World Economic Forum and all over Europe, all of that. And, many people in my life who know I was part of, a little part of that journey, and then, found out that, now the Taliban has taken over the country again, as it did in the 90s, and then they were gone, and then they were partly back, and now they're back in extreme. They're like, the general idea is like, wow, that whole idea of reviving the culture, it really failed. And they see it as a failure because, that school can't exist in Afghanistan anymore, nor can, really any music unless it's entirely in secret. But the truth is it didn't fail because now all around the world there are amazing people like Nazira and Arsen. And really for me, for the really the first 2 years after the Taliban fell, I personally, even though I'm not Afghan, I can't even imagine, what it's like for an Afghan musician. But for me, just as a musician who was a part of that, I could hardly think about it or face it. Like I would have trouble, like even opening messages from people in Afghanistan and stuff, because I was just reading reading the struggles were heartbreaking. But now bringing this program together and getting to, again, conduct an orchestra with Afghan people, as well as we have 30 local musicians who are joining us as well. Getting to bring all that together and to play Afghan music again in an orchestral setting with many of the same people, that we worked with there. For me personally, even for myself, it's big. It's such a life-giving, even healing journey from all of that, knowing that, Afghan music is still alive, even if in exile, but wonderful people like Nazira and Arsen and Milad and Kudrat and all of our composers, Kambar, are keeping it alive, as well as our performers, and being able to be a part of facilitating, bringing that together, and, just making that, just providing the pieces to put it together and make it happen, and bring them from all around where they are in the country now, and all of that. It's going to be amazing, and I have it's been all of my waking hours for the last few weeks and a lot of hours before that, and I love every minute of it.
And really quickly here, we've been talking about violins and cellos and pianos. What is it like working with traditional Afghan instruments for this performance?
Well, that's what makes this kind of orchestra so special, is that it's a mix of both, and that is the Afghan orchestral tradition. And it's a bringing together of two worlds. You've got our traditional Western symphonic orchestra, and we've got sitar, harmonium, rabab, tabla, zerbagli, traditional instruments, and bringing together those two worlds, people who traditionally don't read sheet music and those that do. You've got those challenges, you've got all of that, but it all comes together in this very unique sort of setting.
We got a couple minutes here, but I would love to ask everyone some final thoughts. Kevin, starting with you, what do you hope our listeners get from this conversation today?
I hope that they get a message of hope, and not, yes, there are terrible things happening in the world. There are terrible things happening in Afghanistan, but the message I'm trying to convey with this concert is a message of beauty and hope, celebrating the humanity, the beauty, the resilience. That's why it's called Symphony of Resilience, because people like Arsen and Nazira and all the others are so resilient.
And Nazira, with our conversation today, anything else that you would like our listeners to know?
I just want to add that I also believe that in the darkest time, even in the darkest time, we create and resist all the horrible things that are happening to us, and we just want to say that we're not going to give up, and we're going to keep making Afghan music and keeping it alive as much as we can.
And Arsen, is there a message that you feel is very important for you to leave with us and our listeners today?
Well, I think since I'm the one going last, I'll just
Last but not least.
I'll invite all the wonderful people listening to this to come to the concert on Sunday, and I very much look forward to sharing our music with you and look forward to seeing you there.
Well, thank you all so much. You've been listening to Arsen Fahim, Nazira Wali, who are musicians and will be playing with at the Bushnell this Sunday. Thank you so much, Nazira and Arsen, for being with us today.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for having us.
And you were also listening to Kevin Bishop with Cuatro Puntos. Kevin, thank you for being with us today.
Thank you so much.
I'm Catherine Shen. Today's show is produced by Tess Terrible. Our technical producer is Dylan Reyes. Download Where We Live anytime on your favorite podcast app. And thank you so much for listening.